Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session is about the delimitation of languages. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand the concept. Well, my dear students, if the speakers of two varieties can understand each other, then the two varieties concerned are instances of the same language. Otherwise, they are not. This is a very generalized idea that I would give to you about the delimitation of languages. You know, if there are two groups, there are people from these two groups who speak, two different varieties of codes. If it is mutually understandable, intelligible, then in that case, these are one language. Otherwise, they are not. This is the general criteria that linguists and sociolinguists use. As I have said, this is a general criterion, but this criteria has a lot of serious problems attached to it. Because even popular usage does not correspond consistently to this criterion. There are varieties which we call different languages, may be mutually intelligible. For example, Scandinavian languages, excluding Finnish and Lapp. On the other hand, there are varieties which we call instances of the same language, but they are not mutually understandable by the speakers of these varieties. For example, the so-called dialects of Chinese. Popular usage tends to reflect the other definition of language that is based on prestige. So, if there are two varieties of both of the standard language, then and they are subordinate to different standards, then we would call them languages as separate languages or being part of one language respectively. They must be different languages, and conversely, they must be the same language if they are both subordinate to the same, standard language. This explains the difference between the ideas of the Scandinavian and Chinese varieties. Well, my dear students, this mutual intelligibility, the mutual understanding by the users is a matter of degree. It's very difficult to decide. There is group A and there is group B, and we may say that the people of group speak language X and group B speaks language Y. Now, there is a possibility that people A understand the language of group B, that is language Y, and vice versa. But how far? There can be different levels of that understanding. There can be very little understanding. There can be somewhat, to some degree, there can be an understanding. There can be a good understanding. There can be a fair enough understanding. And there can be a very good understanding or mutual intelligibility. And even the words, fair or good or very good or excellent kind of the words, they are again relative terms, and we cannot exactly say how much exactly would be understandable that would fall under good or not so good or excellent or just fair. So this raises certain questions, and we have certain questions to ponder over. For example, how high up this scale do these two varieties need to be in order to count as members of the same language community? Community 1, Community 2. People speaking, two different varieties and understanding each other. How much understanding on the scale, is required to say that both these varieties actually are one language? Actually, the answer, as I said earlier, is very arbitrary. Varieties may be arranged in a dialect continuum. This is actually a way of examining that. How to, arrange in a dialect continuum, geographically, in a broader area where there are different geographical communities, for example. So, how variety A of community A is is understandable between A and B, and how between B and C, and how between C and D. So because on the geographical scale, language would gradually vary from one group, regional area, to the other group and to the other regional area. The problem in all this scale that we draw of these this dialect continuum is that language A and B may be understandable mutually, language B and C may be mutually intelligible, in the same way C and D, etc., and D and E. But when it comes to the mutual intelligibility of A and E, the two extremes of this continuum, maybe A and E would be so different then they would not be intelligible mutually. In that case, would they be called one language or not is a huge question. From the real world, I can give one example of such continuum that is said to stretch from Amsterdam through Germany to Vienna, and another example is of Calais to the south, Italy. Mutual intelligibility is not really a relation between these two varieties. It is also about mutual understanding of the people as well, because ultimately it is the people who use language. This being so, the degree of mutual intelligibility depends upon not on the amount of how many of the linguistic items, how many of the code items or the lexical items of one variety overlap with the other variety. For example, 10,000 words or 100 words or whatever the number of variety A overlap with variety B, means both the languages share that. It is not an issue of that. It is also an issue of, that is concerned with the qualities of the people. So, the idea of delimiting a language in itself is not very clear-cut, and it is not easy to find answers. There are certain ambiguities related to it.